Today, we're diving into a really powerful and, I think, provocative article by an author named Sixbert Sengwa. It's called The Silence of the Saints. And look, this isn't some dry academic paper. It's better described as a prophetic lament, a really urgent call to the modern church which, in his view, has kind of lost its voice.
Right out of the gate, the author makes one thing crystal clear. This message is not for everybody. He's not writing for the casual observer or the comfortable. No, he says he's addressing those who weep in secret. He's speaking directly to an audience that already feels like something's wrong, something's been lost.
And this is the question that just drives the entire article. It's the central mystery he's trying to solve. In our world, which is filled with constant noise from culture and politics, Sengwa is asking a simple but profound question. Why has this one particular voice, what he calls the voice of the saints, grown so quiet?
To frame his argument, Sengwa uses this really powerful metaphor. He pictures the church as a city on a hill, a city that was once protected by fearless watchmen who would sound the alarm at the first sign of danger. But now, he writes, those watchmen have fallen asleep. And the result? The city's truths have become optional, and its gates are completely unguarded.
So, what happens when the watchmen are asleep? Well, the author describes a pretty stark transformation. He argues the church has shifted from this powerful institution, one that actively confronted darkness and commanded respect, to a polite entity, one that seems more concerned with being culturally relevant than being reverent.
And this gets right to the heart of his entire critique. Sengwa directly challenges our modern definition of love. He's arguing that when you're facing destructive trends, staying silent isn't kindness. He calls it complicity, basically a refusal to warn people, disguised as something gentle and nice.
Okay, so the author then starts to trace this decline back to a fundamental shift in the very nature of the church. He describes it as a journey away from the spontaneous fire of its origins and toward the scripted safety of modern professional practice. And here he lays out this really stark comparison. On one side, you have what he calls the age of Pentecost, all about raw, spirit-led power. And on the other side, the age of protocol, which he says is defined by safe, polished presentations and being respectable in the eyes of culture. He argues that in making that trade, something absolutely vital was lost.
He wraps up this section with a really blunt warning. When that fire of a genuine spiritual encounter is swapped out for formality, faith becomes powerless. It's just reduced to a performance, a form, a structure, without the actual force to change anything.
So, if the voice is silent, what silenced it? Sengwa points his finger at several modern ideologies, which he calls new gospels or altars of compromise. He believes these are what's responsible for muzzling the church's prophetic voice. The first one he critiques is what he calls the gospel of safety. This is the idea that the absolute highest virtue is to avoid offending anyone. And in this mindset, speaking a hard truth isn't seen as loving, it's seen as judgmental, and therefore it's wrong.
He illustrates this with a short, sharp parable. There's the shepherd, right? He's praised by everyone for being so kind because he never raises the alarm about the wolf. The people love him for it. But, in the end, his so-called kindness leads to the flock's total destruction. The message is pretty clear. Safety at all costs isn't a virtue.
Then he brings up the idea of mammon in the pulpit, asking if maybe money and popularity have become the real things driving the message. He reframes that famous biblical passage, essentially asking if the chase for more followers and more funding has caused leaders to lose sight of their ultimate accountability to God.
Next, the author critiques a certain version of the gospel of inclusion. He argues that this form of compassion is actually counterfeit because, in his view, it welcomes people without ever challenging them to change. It affirms who they are right now, but it denies the possibility of who they could become through transformation. It turns grace into simple permission.
But this whole article isn't just a critique. It's not all doom and gloom. It actually pivots right here, toward hope. Sengwa believes that even with this widespread silence, there's a faithful few, what he calls the remnant, who are starting to find their voice again, speaking truth from the margins.
And he grounds this hope in history, in biblical precedent. He points to people like Elijah, who stood alone against hundreds, John the Baptist, whose whole message was just one word, repent, and Micaiah, who literally chose prison over telling a convenient lie. For the author, these are the blueprints for an uncompromised voice. And this leads to such a hopeful thought from the author. That prophetic trumpet, he argues, it's not silent, not at all. It has merely changed hands.
It's been passed from the big popular platforms to ordinary, everyday people who just refuse to bow to the spirit of the age.
So this brings us to the author's final, urgent conclusion, which is really the core thesis of his entire piece, that in a world that is walking toward destruction, the most loving thing you can possibly do is speak the truth.
Think about it. A father who screams at his child to stop them from running into a busy street. That shout might sound harsh to someone just walking by, but it's an act of fierce rescuing love. For Sang-Hwa, that's the kind of love the world needs right now. Not a passive tolerance, but an active, loving warning.
And here is his direct charge to the reader, to the watchman. He draws this powerful line in the sand between two very different callings. There's the call of culture, which is to be accepted, to echo what everyone else is saying, and then there's the call of faith, which is to be faithful and to challenge the age.
And so, in the end, Sang-Hwa leaves every single reader with the same question that started his whole article. He frames the choice not as being between relevant or irrelevant, but between two different paths. The path of cultural safety, which he says leads to silence, and the path of sanctification, which demands a voice. The choice, he suggests, is ours.